There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Cornelius Willis. He is the Chief Marketing Officer over at Clary. Cornelius, how are you doing today, sir?
I am so excited to talk to you and your audience, Logan.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's a great day.
It is a great day. It's finally feeling a little bit warmer in my neck of the woods in Colorado, even though we had snow last week. Hopefully we'll get warmer. So between that and having a conversation with you about the state of revenue operations, I'm doing pretty good today. So before we get into our conversation around the definition, some of the problems and solutions facing organizations specifically within revenue operations today, I would love for you to introduce yourself a bit to the listeners here on B2B Growth and share a little bit about what you and the team at Clary are up to these days.
Sure. So I lead the mighty marketing team at Clary, and it's such an exciting place to work right now. Our momentum is very strong, and we're really helping a lot of different organizations. So what Clary is a company that helps revenue operations teams, and by that I mean sales, marketing, customer success, and the operations teams that support them, helps revenue teams generate more pipeline, close more business, and forecast the business more predictably. And we're doing that now for about 250 organizations. I'm including a bunch of companies you've heard of. So Adobe, Symantec, Lenovo, Nutanix, Okta, a whole bunch of companies that have actually gone public based on having foresight into their revenue. The way we do this is pretty interesting. We scan all of your business systems, including your email, your calendar, marketing automation, enablement systems, and we look for signals that give us information about deals and contacts. And we automatically update the CRM with that information so your reps don't have to. And the results are that your reps get more time back to sell. Sales managers have more insight into what's happening in the pipeline. Marketing folks know what salespeople are working on, and businesses know what their revenue is going to be. And the results are pretty remarkable. As I say, we've had a number of our customers go public based upon the ability to see where their revenue is coming from. And it also changes the nature of conversations within organizations to make them, frankly, much more trust-based and to have a much higher level of collaboration and empathy across sales, marketing, customer success, and again, the operations teams that support those groups. I'm kind of unique in my background in that I carried a bag and paid off my student loans actually with commission checks. My territory was Lower Manhattan, and I sold business intelligence software to banks. And so having that background really helps me in this new world of revenue operations. It gives me some perspective on what the sales organizations face and what individual salespeople and sales leaders deal with every day and how we can make that better.
I love a couple of things that you said there, Cornelius. In your background of having carried a bag and worked on the sales side, now leading the mighty marketing team at Clary, which I love the way that you refer to your team there as well. I think that leads to that empathy that you mentioned is really needed. And the other thing you touched on there that I think we're going to circle back to here in a bit is the trust factor between organizations, especially when silo walls are up high between sales, marketing,
and customer success. I think we'll circle back to that in a bit. For now, what I would love for you to kick off the conversation with, Cornelius, is a definition of revenue operations. I think it means something different. It connotates something different, brings something different to mind with different folks. And so from your perspective, how do you really see the role and the definition of revenue operations for most of the organizations that you work with and just in general today?
So for us, revenue operations encompasses every role in the company that has a number. And if you think about it, probably everybody listening to this podcast is working against a number every day and every quarter. And that doesn't matter whether they're marketing folks or sales folks or customer success folks. And revenue operations is that full team. And, if you think about it, creating that accountability between those organizations is the real key to successful collaboration. So for us, revenue operations is the big tent, right? It's everyone driving revenue for the company. And that is the most important business process in any organization.
I love the way you describe it as a big tent covering these different functional roles. I'm just a picture person, so that brings something very crystal clear to my mind, Cornelius. As you think about some of the challenges that are facing organizations today, what are some of the biggest areas of concern and some of the things holding organizations back from really having a fully cohesive revenue team across these functions that's really firing on all cylinders?
Well, three things that I can identify right away. First of all, the core systems don't actually have the data in them that are required to run the business. And the reason for this is simple, because reps don't update the CRM system. It's really no fault of the sales force or the salespeople. The systems aren't well designed to capture data. Back when they were designed, salespeople had deal assistants that would update the information offline. And now that world is gone. So expecting sales reps to keep the CRM up to date is ridiculous. So the first thing you have to do is automate that. The second big problem is the siloization of all the IT services behind each of those functions. So as a marketing leader, I have my Marketo and my various systems. The sales leader has their CRM and their various systems. And you often run into the situation in companies where there's a dueling report meeting, where I'm bringing in my report, my counterpart's bringing in their report, and then we have a conversation that lasts an hour on whose data is right, where the data came from, and whose view of the world is correct. Right. And then the third thing is a lack of shared process, because you don't have, a complete data set across the organization to look at, because everybody's got their own reports and systems. It's very, very hard to create an integrated revenue operations process that takes the business from, the first touch to the close to the renewal. And here's the thing, though. The customer is way, way ahead of us, right? The customer is already, getting most of their information about their purchase before they ever contact the company. Right? The world has changed, but most organizations haven't caught up to where the customer is and still are operating in these silos.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And those silos, coming back to something that you touched on earlier, it's really tough to have empathy for people in other functional roles when there's this large wall dividing you, whether that's customer success to marketing, marketing to sales, or anywhere within that triad. And then, as you mentioned, it's tough to have empathy. And then these trust issues arise, right? If there's no one single source of truth, then there become these battles over the data and trying to even figure them out, even when there is a baseline of trust. But that can get eroded very quickly in those sorts of meetings, right?
Yeah, the problem comes down to, in my experience, this basic conversation that we shouldn't have to have. And the conversation comes down to some version of this. It's, are you doing your job? Mm-hmm. Right? And we have that kind of same adversarial problem, whether it's the sales manager working with the sales rep, whether it's marketing working with sales, whether it's customer success working with sales. It's, prove to me that you're actually delivering what you said you were going to deliver. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get into this scenario of the dueling reports and the bring your own report culture. And when you have a shared view of the business, when you have a shared data set, when you have all your assumptions visible, a lot of that, silly conversation goes away, and you can have a conversation about what to do about the nature of the business. And that's, I think, the most exciting thing that I see amongst our customers is they started to have those kind of conversations rather than, Are you producing enough pipeline for me? Well, I can see if you're producing enough pipeline for me. You've got gaps here. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. It's really tough to drive alignment, teamwork, and everybody rowing in the same direction and feeling good about what everyone's doing when the start of that conversation is, are you doing your job? Which, if we're honest and we think about some of these meetings that we have all been in, we know that that's kind of the underlying premise and where things are starting from. So I think moving away from that is part of the solution. What I'd like to do, Cornelius, is talk about these three problem areas, and let's flip them around and talk about some of the things that organizations can do to solve for them. You alluded to part of it in the first one when you talked about automating, but I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. You mentioned, core systems don't have the data needed, and they're not designed for the way that sales, marketing, and customer success do their jobs today. What are some of the things in successful organizations that you've worked with or you see out there that they're doing to solve for this problem and automate some of their data input?
Well, it's stunning to me how many organizations accept the status quo. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, there's this underlying assumption that, nobody updates the CRM. There's nothing we can do about that. And I think about all the different times in my career as a marketer, right, where I've tried to create incentives or tried to create penalties to get the sales force to update the CRM. Right. And that's just kind of assumed by most companies that that's just the way things are. And so we don't have any data. And so we can't really forecast. And so we can't really see what's going on inside the pipeline. So solving that problem through automation, well, it gives the reps a whole lot of time back so they can sell, which is great. But it also gives the organization the underlying data that it needs to actually operate in a modern and efficient way. So, I mean, the answer there is technology. It's straightforward. It's really straightforward. Go in and look at the semantic structures and do the AI on the email file, on the calendaring system, and on the rest of the signal data, and then correlate it with deals and automatically update the CRM. And that's part of the secret sauce at Clary. So automation is the answer to the first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So starting at where is the activity happening? Because it's not like it's all happening offline and in face-to-face meetings. There are, calendar invites, there are emails, there's a lot of digital data. It's connecting that to the back end and making it, reportable and visible. So I think you make a very good point there that we can leverage a lot of the digital data that we already have. Right. The second problem you talked about, Cornelius, is the silos between, not only the silos between functions, which we've talked about a little bit and I think is well documented, everybody understands that, but the silos between the systems of each function you talked about earlier. Talk to us about some of the things that you see successful organizations doing here to address this problem.
So there's been a lot of efforts and certainly a lot of products marketed around the idea of a common data set for the organization, a common view. And the problem is it's not just about the data; it's also about the user experience. Right? There needs to be an interface, a shared work surface that different teams can use to collaborate to actually take action on the business. Just having a data warehouse with a set of tables in it is not even half of a solution. But having the data plus the workflow and the user experience around that to create a collaboration context across the teams is the critical thing. What we see organizations doing in our customer base is changing the processes of revenue operations to create collaboration moments between groups, right? So there's actually a really remarkable case study, in my opinion, on our site that we did with Topo and about Okta and the way they run their forecast process. But the way they do it is they have alternate in-quarter, out-quarter meetings, and the out-quarter meeting is a meeting that is led by the marketing team, and it's about looking for gaps in coverage in the pipeline, so that marketing can take action to do events or do targeted marketing activities around that particular gap, right? But creating shared context and shared process across the teams is a thing that marks best in class for these organizations.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
And that leads into that third problem of, not only lack of shared systems and dashboards and an interface that everyone can use easily, not just a data set that people can go into. I love the way you put that. That doesn't even solve half the problem. But then, as you talked about here, moving into not only shared data, but shared processes. Can you tell us a little bit more about where organizations have taken it to that next level of not only looking at the same data, looking at the same dashboards, using the same systems, but then building processes around those? I think you alluded to a little bit there. I mean, I love what you said okay, here are the gaps in the pipeline, for sales. Here's what marketing can do about it. That's just a very different conversation than, are you doing your job? Are you doing your job? And pointing the finger back and forth. It seems much more collaborative. And so building on that, what are the next steps that we take together so that we can row together, in the same cadence and hopefully in the same direction?
Yeah, it's really notable when you think about cultural and process change. One of the things to look at is, what does the culture and process currently have and why, and how do you build on that? And there's certain key moments in the selling cadence, in the revenue cadence, that are there for really good reasons. Like, for example, a forecast call, right? The forecast call is there to create a commitment moment between the sales rep or the sales manager and their superior. And it's a really important psychological exercise to get people to say what they're going to do, because if they say what they're going to do, they're much, much more likely to do it. And so the key really to, I think, making these kinds of changes is to build on the existing, for want of a better word, traditional cadence that you see in sales and marketing organizations. So things around, the one-on-one meeting between the sales rep and the sales manager, the QBR, right? The forecast call. And the forecast call is not just a question of forecasting the revenue for this quarter. It's a question of forecasting the pipeline for out quarters, right? But to build around those key moments in the existing cultural rituals, if you will, in the existing, sort of revenue operations cadence in your company. And what can you do to make those more transparent, make those more accountable, create, accountability moments around those, and then through that build trust across organizations and within and between teams.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It comes back to that point of empathy and trust that we talked about so much early in the conversation. As you look to do these very tactical things, they roll back up to that strategy of building trust and breaking down those silo walls between those three main components of revenue operations. And, I love the way that you hit on all three potential solutions for organizations to be thinking about: automating their data input, breaking down the silo walls, not only between functions, but between the systems of each of those functions, and giving them shared processes and data sets. And I love what you said there as well, in leaning on the existing cadences and the existing, traditions of process within the organization. It's not that you have to reinvent the wheel. It just takes a little bit of a shift in mindset.
That's right. Yeah.
I love that. Well, Cornelius, this has been a great conversation. I love the way that you guys are looking holistically at how teams can operate more efficiently across their entire revenue organization. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, ask any follow-up questions, or learn more about what you and the team at Clary are up to these days, what's the best way for them to do that?
So follow us on LinkedIn. We publish helpful guides and tips and tricks and interviews with our customers 2 or 3 times a week. You'll also hear about all the parties and employee celebrations that we have inside Clary, because we're excited to share the full Clary culture with the world. Or check out our blog, clary.com/blog, and lots of interesting content. Another thing to look at, we just launched our Masters of Revenue series, which are interviews with revenue leaders, focusing on revenue leaders that are leaders of that full big tent that I described earlier of sales, marketing, and customer success. and what it takes to run those kind of teams and how they put it together. Our first episode is out. It's got Carl Eschenbach, the former Chief Operating Officer of VMware, and Yamini Rangan, who runs the entire revenue operations at Dropbox, and their insights into how to build a predictable sales culture.
Oh,
so lots of different ways to keep up with Clary.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you pointed out the Masters of Revenue series. I was just checking that out. Haven't had a chance to dive into episode 1, as you mentioned, but just in kind of getting some of the teasers there as I was looking at that, preparing for our conversation, I thought, man, this is going to be some really great stuff. So definitely look for Masters of Revenue on the Clary site. That's Clary, CLARI.com. That definitely looks like a great series. I'm going to be digging into, I know Nikki Ivy, one of our co-hosts here on B2B Growth, connected with some of your team down at Serious Decisions, an event you guys put on. So you guys do put on good parties and have a good time, to your point of the Clary culture. And we've seen that. So it's been great to connect with you guys, Cornelius, and to have you on the show today talking about some of the solutions that folks can aim for in developing a more cohesive and ultimately a more productive revenue team. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's so fun to share. And we'll come back later and tell you more.
Awesome.
Okay, take care.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.